Hi, my name is Jennifer and I'm here to teach you about one of the most important parts of your embroidery machine, your needle. This little needle may be small, but the more you know about it, the better your embroidery quality is going to be. So let's start at the very basics, the different parts of the needle. Every needle has 5 main parts: the shank, the blade or shaft, the groove, the eye, and the point. Let's talk first about the shank. The shank is the upper part of the needle which you insert into the needle bar of your machine. Embroidery machine needles have 2 types of shanks. For commercial embroidery machines, the shank is completely round. For home embroidery machines, the shank is round on one side and flat on the other. It's important to check your machine manual to learn how to properly insert the needle. Improper insertion of the shank can cause skipped stitches or no stitches at all, or may cause your needle to break. On home embroidery machines, the flat side should be facing away from you, like this. Now let's briefly talk about the needle shaft. The shaft, or the blade of the needle, is the lower portion that extends from the base of the shank to the point. The groove, the eye, and the point are all elements of the shaft. Needles come in a large variety of sizes. It's important to know that when we talk about the needle size, we're actually talking about the diameter of the shaft. Needles are sized according to 2 systems, European and American. The American size is the smaller number and is just an assigned number rather than an actual measurement. The European size is the larger number and is based on the metric system. If you'll notice the European number, this will tell you the diameter size of the needle shaft in hundredths of a millimeter. For example, a size 65 needle has a shaft that is 0.65 of a millimeter. A size 75 needle has a shaft which is 0.75 of a millimeter, while a size 100 needle shaft is 1 full millimeter in diameter. Basically, the higher the number on the needle size, the larger the diameter of the needle shaft. Most needle packages will show both the American and European numbers separated by a slash, for example 65.9, 75.11, 90.14, and so on. Sometimes the American number is listed first, sometimes the European number is first. We'll talk more about choosing a needle size in a moment. For now, let's move on to the groove of the needle. The groove is the hollowed out area on the front of the needle shaft, just above the eye. The groove is the long indentation on the front of the needle. The groove serves as a protective channel for the thread to lie in as the needle passes through the fabric, and acts as the very last thread guide. This permits the thread to remain close to the needle during the stitch formation process. Embroidery machine needles have a deep protective groove, which reduces the friction of the thread. Now let's talk about the most familiar part of the needle eye. The eye is, of course, the hole above the needle point. This is where the thread passes through. The eye carries the top thread into the bobbin case for stitch formation. I have here a size 965 needle and a size 1490 needle. As you'll notice, the size of the needle eye corresponds with the size of the needle. The larger the needle size, the larger all the parts of the needle are, including the eye. Your thread will pass back and forth through the eye many, many times before finally becoming a stitch in the fabric. For this reason, it's important to choose the right size of needle with a big enough eye, and also to choose a good quality thread. If the needle size is too small for your thread will be fighting to get through the eye properly, resulting in the shredding of thread and thread or needle breakage. If the needle size is too big, however, the thread has too much wiggle room and that's hard on your thread. A good rule of thumb is that the needle eye should be about twice the size of the thread. The last part of the needle we'll discuss today is the point. Choosing the right point for your fabric can make a real difference in your embroidery results. There are 2 basic needle points, the sharp point and the ball point. Sharp needles have a very sharp point, while ballpoint needles have a slightly rounded point. These points are specifically designed to work on different types of fabric. Sharp needles are designed for use with tightly woven fabrics such as cotton, denim, terry cloth, or any other fabric that won't unravel. Sharp needles have a very sharp point which pierces and cuts through the fibers of the fabric. Ballpoint needles have a slightly rounded point which slips between the fabric threads, pushing them aside instead of cutting them. It's recommended to use the right point intended for the fabric you're embroidering on. If you use a sharp needle on a loosely woven fabric, you may cut through the fiber, creating a hole in the fabric or causing the fabric to run. If you use a ballpoint needle on a tightly woven fabric, the blunt force of the ballpoint may tear and pull the fibers, resulting in uneven embroidery and possible damage to the fabric. For best results, choose the right needle point for your fabric, a sharp point for tightly woven fabrics and a ballpoint for loosely woven fabrics. Now that we've learned more about the 5 main components of a needle, let's quickly review what we've learned. Needles are made up of a shank, a blade, a groove, an eye, and a point. There are 2 types of needle shanks. The shank for the commercial embroidery machine is completely round, while the shank for the home embroidery machine has a flat side. There are basically 2 types of needle points, the sharp point and the ball point. Sharp needles are designed for tightly woven fabrics, while ball points are designed for loosely woven fabrics. It's important to choose both the right needle point for your project and also the right needle size. Remember that needles are sized according to 2 systems, European and American. The American size is the smaller number, the European size is the larger number, and is a metric measurement of the diameter of the needle. Let's talk some more about needle sizes. Choosing the right size of needle for your project is essential to quality embroidery. You'll want to select the size of your needle based on the weight of your fabric and the weight and type of the thread being used. This chart shows different types of thread and the recommended needle size for that thread and can be found on Embroidery.com. When talking about needle sizes, the higher the needle size, the larger the needle. However, thread sizes work the opposite way. The higher the weight of the thread, the thinner the thread is. For example, a 40-weight thread is pretty standard for embroidery. This is a spool of 40-weight rayon thread. This is a spool of 12-weight wool thread. See how much thicker it is than the 40-weight thread? The lower the thread weight, the thicker the thread. This here is a 60-weight spool of rayon thread. See how much thinner the thread is? The higher the thread weight, the thinner the thread. The basic rule of thumb is that the thinner your thread is, the smaller your needle should be. The thicker your thread is, the larger your needle should be. This is a size 965 needle. It's quite thin and has a smaller eye. Use a 965 needle for 50 and 60 weight threads. This is a size 1175 needle, the most commonly used needle. The reason the 1175 needle is so popular is because it can be used with a wide variety of fabrics and threads. You'll want to use an 1175 needle for your 40 weight thread, including rayon, polyester, and some metallic threads. This is a size 1490 needle. It has a larger shaft and eye. You'll want to use the 1490 needle for your 30-weight threads, for example when using a 30-weight cotton thread. This is a size 16100 needle. As you can see, it's quite large and sturdy. You'll want to use this for your really thick threads, such as 12-weight wool. I'm now going to demonstrate a technique which can be helpful to you in choosing a needle size. Thread a needle onto a length of thread about 12 inches long. Hold the thread out in front of you horizontally. Tilt one end to a 45-degree angle. If the needle slides easily down the thread, like this, that's pretty good. When choosing a needle size, you'll also want to keep in mind the fabric you'll be embroidering on. This chart shows a variety of fabrics and the suggested needle size for each fabric and can be found on Embroidery.com. Basically, the thinner and more lightweight your fabric is, the smaller your needle and the thinner your thread should be. It is suggested to always try to use the smallest needle possible to adequately perform the job without damaging your fabric. If the needle is too big for the fabric or thread, you'll be able to see the holes created by the needle. For example, this design was stitched twice using 2 different needles. On the sample on the left, the needle used was much too big for the fabric and thread. Notice how the needle left large penetrating holes in the fabric. Also notice the stitches making up the flower stems and petals. They appear to be narrower than the sample on the right. This is because the stitches are actually sinking into the large holes created by the needle. Just remember what common sense tells you. The thinner your thread and the thinner your fabric, the smaller your needle should be. The thicker the thread and fabric, the larger the needle should be. In this video segment, we've just covered the very basics about needles, but there are also many kinds of specialty needles designed for use with different projects. One of our most popular needles at Embroidery.com is the size 1175 titanium needle. This needle has a coating of titanium nitride, which makes it more durable, often lasting 3 to 5 times longer than regular needles. Titanium needles are particularly useful when embroidering large stitch patterns or sewing on dense, tough fabric. There are lots of needles to choose from, but whichever needle you use, it's very important to remember to change your needle often. It is recommended that you change your needle at the beginning of every new embroidery project, or at least after every 8 hours of embroidery. Just think of how many times your needle has penetrated your fabric in that amount of time. That tiny tip will wear out, and overused, dull needles can cause all types of problems, including snags and puckering, needle or thread breaks, and ruined fabric, among other things. A clean, well-functioning needle will give you sharp, well-formed stitches. Needles are not expensive, so replace them often. Remember, your needle may be small, but the quality of your embroidery and the performance of your embroidery machine depend on it.